Welcome, everyone. So glad you're here. My name is Naya Bricker. I'm the Administrative Director at the Fine Arts Work Center. And this is a virtual event. We were hoping to have this event in person in our fabulous newly renovated common room. However, we've pivoted and adjusted. And so now we're gathering virtually. So we might even have a wider audience than we would have in person. I'm so glad you're all here. Just letting a few more people in from the waiting room. And I will be here throughout the call as your Zoom technical assistant. So if there's any problems with the connection, if you can't hear, you can't see, you can send me a message. I think at this point, we're all pretty familiar with Zoom, but if not, welcome everyone if you're joining just now. We've got our mute button down along the bottom row of icons. Feel free to unmute yourself at the end of tonight's presentation if you want to ask a question. And then I ask that keep yourself muted or remain quiet if you keep your mic off. And then if you want to turn your video on, it's great to see faces. It makes it a little less lonely. So wonderful to see all of you out there. But of course you can keep your camera off as well. I invite you to use the chat and you can share where you're joining us from. I'm in Provincetown. I'm joining from my studio, which is my remote office at the moment. We are working remotely for our health and safety. My colleague Mi-Young Son is also working remotely. She's on the call along with our executive director, Sharon Poley, a little wave. And we've got Minneapolis. Oh, so exciting. I feel like we've got a lot of Provincetown as well. Truro maybe. Awesome. So I'm going to start us off and then pass the mic to Mi-Young. I'm just going to read our land acknowledgement. Although we are gathered virtually today, the Fine Arts Work Center is located on the unceded native homelands of the Wampanoag Nation, the people of the First Light in Provincetown at the tip of Cape Cod. We're on the historic lands of the Peyomet Wampanoag tribal village near the villages of Nauset and the Potonumicut. I'd like to begin with a breath of gratitude for their ancestors and modern day descendants, and for the birds, insects, animals, and other beings that continue to grace the air, rivers, grasslands, bogs, cedar swamps, forests, and beach that are both seasonally and permanently here, as well as the whales, dolphins, seals, turtles, sharks, fish, shellfish, and crustaceans in the Atlantic Ocean surrounding us. And I want to give a special thanks to artist Elizabeth James Perry for her collaboration on co-developing our land acknowledgement. And I'll put it in the chat so you can take a quick look at it. Again, my name is Naya, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Mi-Young Son. She is our visual arts coordinator for the fellowship program.
Hello. Oh, geez, this is my first virtual presentation, so I'm a little nervous seeing all the many faces, many screens. But okay, here I go. I'm very thrilled to introduce Litha Wilson. She currently lives and works near Hudson, New York. She earned her BFA from Syracuse University and a MFA from Hunter College. Residencies include Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, McDowell, Yaddo, Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, and the Headland Center for the Arts, among others. Wilson has exhibited at Mass MoCA, the Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, International Center for Photography, Easel Museum in Vienna, Bronx Museum of the Arts, Socrates Sculpture Park, and the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art. Recent projects include an outdoor public sculpture commissioned by the Rochester Institute of Technology and a solo exhibition at Gallery Christophe Gaillard in Paris, France. Please welcome Letha Wilson.
Hey. Thank you. So lovely. Thank you so much for the introduction. And yes, I'm a little sad I can't be there in person, but you know, I'm glad that we came up with this alternative. So thank you for being here. And maybe it's a little warmer this way. I don't know. The first time I went to Provincetown, I actually was a visiting artist at the Fine Arts Workshop Center almost 10 years ago. So I feel like I have this fond memory of the place and the room and the space and the kind of like beaches in the winter. And Naya, I love your introduction, kind of listing all the living beings to appreciate. So spiritually, I'm there with you. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen.
Go for it.
All right. All right, cool. So yes, as Myung kind of touched on in my beginnings, I actually was born in Honolulu. My parents both went to college there, and that's where they met. So I lived there till I was 4, but I don't really remember it. And then we moved to Colorado when I was 4. So I kind of grew up in Colorado and still kind of consider it like my home state in some ways. And growing up, my dad was our whole family, but really my dad was really into, you know, outdoor excursions and backpack trips and fishing. And you know, we never went skiing. We were sort of like on the ground ice fishing. So when, you know, starting from when I was like in middle school, my brother and my parents and I would go on these backpack trips that were pretty intense, like spending a full week out in the Rocky Mountains and kind of getting to some very, very remote places. And also like there would always be a camera passed around. I don't even remember, like whoever the family member was who'd take a photo. And my dad would pick the best one and we'd frame it on the wall. So those are sort of my family photos have no real people in them. They're just kind of mountains, landscapes. So when I moved to the East Coast and went to Syracuse, I've been in the East Coast ever since, like kind of carrying with me these memories of home and the landscape through photographs of the landscape. And so I moved to New York City in 1998 and went to grad school at Hunter pretty soon thereafter. And I was always interested. I was actually, even though I was a painting major in undergrad, I was always really interested in kind of work that cross media, could be a painting and a sculpture, could work be photography and printmaking. And I was always really interested in kind of merging and layering different materials in media. So this is a piece I made in grad school, and thinking about photography, could it be both a representation and an abstraction? And it was this series where I was using whiteout to literally take one element of the photograph and remove it. And sometimes it was like, in this case, like the human-made elements of a cabin and a car hidden. So I was always working with these photographs. I wasn't really sure what to do with them, but as a viewer and a spectator, I was like I was very interested in sculptural works and immersive spaces and architecture. And one of the first jobs I had in New York was working for an artist, Jason Middlebrook, and he built walls at the New Museum for the shows and brought me along the crew and taught me how to build walls. And I was really fascinated by this, that you could just kind of build your own room. So I made some pieces that I built in my studio that were these kind of waiting rooms. And then towards the end of grad school, I did my first kind of literal photo sculpture, I guess you could call it, kind of bringing these ideas together. And I imagined sort of like these forms. So in this case, it's actually a photograph of my mom and my dad. And I took this photograph for this piece and building this form where it's almost like they were extruded out of the wall and into the ground. And it was this kind of strange action, but I was very interested in the possibility for a photograph to be kind of ruptured. And like the moment I like screwed a screw through the middle of this photo. I was like very excited. So thinking about landscape photography and can it be contemporary and can it be more than just a calendar image or an Ansel Adams photograph? This was actually a photo I took on the Vegas Strip, and this is a Frontier Hotel sign extruded. So this piece is like over 6 feet tall. And these were like 2003, basically. It's like almost 20 years ago, which is crazy. So that was sort of the beginning of my interest in photo and sculpture, but at the same time, I was also had a series of videos I did called Possibilities for a Car Drive, where I was sort of navigating the landscape in more real time, starting with a single view and splitting every few minutes as a way of kind of mapping spaces. And I would shoot in different kind of city. It worked best in like a small city, but like winter in Colorado, or this was in Nova Scotia. And it was actually primarily the videos I was showing out of grad school. And then finally, like, this was my first outdoor sculpture, and I was invited to do this show at the Rockland Center for Arts. And my history of like, so I built walls working for Jason, and then I worked at Artist Space Gallery. That was actually like my first, when I moved to New York, I was an intern there. And then I worked there part-time through grad school. So I was like their wall builder for all the shows. And there's this constant like recycling of like building new walls for the show and tearing them down and throwing it out. So I culled the materials for this piece in like one truckload from one installation. There's vinyl on the walls. So these are the gallery walls kind of turned inside out and made into a lean-to. I was interested in like, what would happen, you know, to this drywall outside. So I sort of loved the way this deteriorated. It was up for like 6 months. And the way the water kind of created this, I don't know, archaeology on top of through the drywall. So that led me to this piece called, that was at Socrates Sculpture Park, and the show called Waste Not, Want Not. And it was all using reclaimed gallery walls and wood from an art fair on the park to make this garden that was then repurposed. All the plants in the soil were repurposed after the show. So that's kind of another little branch of the work, but this is the final extrusion piece I made. And it's a single image, and it's from my father into a Joshua tree installed in a corner. In this piece, you can really see the layers repeating cutting. So it's actually using styrofoam to make these pieces. And around this time, I really felt like I needed to take a step back and reconsider my studio practice. Like I had this job at Artist Space that was quite time consuming, and I just felt like I needed time. And so I quit my job. And also I kept getting rejected from artist residencies. So I gave myself a residency at my parents' house. I'm probably 30 at this point, but like I was 30 and just lived in my brother's room. And I don't know, it was very important to me at the time. And if you go to my Instagram page, my mom wrote me the sweetest acceptance letter, which you can see. So yeah. So anyways, I need to get out of time and think and work. And when I came back, it was like rethinking the materials I was working with, because I didn't like working with the styrofoam and it didn't really make sense. And those pieces were kind of expensive and time consuming. And I wanted my practice to be more flexible and like every day and kind of get messy and quicker. So I started actually, when I came back, thinking about the materials, using materials such as wood. I was interested in like materials that were kind of a combination of natural, but also building materials. And also I actually went back to the darkroom and started printing my photographs, which weirdly made it easier for me to work with because they were less precious. So this is probably around 2006 or something. And I'm like making these works in my studio. And now that I'm printing my own photographs, I go back to this archive of photos I've shot and start pulling them out. And the relationship between the image and the form becomes a little bit more poetic and a little bit more less literal than taking that outline. And so so thinking of the photograph, I'm going to show you this now. So this comes from my sketchbook around that time. I don't know, you might have built it. Can you not see the top of this? I'm not sure. anyways, there's an FU word in there. How to say FU to a photograph while still adoring it secretly. Arrows, bullets, bombs, fire, blood paint, obstruction, big drill, concrete. I've done a lot of these things since then, but kind of this idea that I'm skeptical of the beauty of the photograph, but I desire it. I'm thinking of that place I was. It's not really the same, but it is alluring. Can that image transport me? But sort of frustration at the kind of flatness and the deadness of a photograph as it sits there. So this sort of love-hate was sort of what I was getting at. So now that was sort of a chronology of the beginning. I'm gonna now show the work in a little bit different, organized by kind of ways I think about approaching the photograph, not chronological. So thinking about the face of an image. So this is a very quick moment. So after that residency I gave myself and then finally started getting into real residencies, I got into Skowhegan in 2009 after applying for at least 10 years. So that was actually an amazing summer for me because I had finally, the studio was right there in nature and it created more of a direct line. Anyway, so spray painting on the surface of an image, dipping the photograph in, this is Portland cement. These are dipped into Portland cement face down. And then this was actually another piece I made at Skowhegan that kind of came at the end of the summer, thinking about, it's called Right Back at You. Thinking about the sculptural move as like that ray of light coming out of that flashlight back into this image, this sort of gorgeous image of Utah as the sun setting. And it was funny because around this time, like Tumblr was happening and people were finally like seeing my work and kind of noticing it. I think photographers specifically. Thinking about frames and breaking out of the frame. This is called Granite Tumbler. This is, again, a kind of an early piece, but called Vertical Horizon, taking a horizontal image and pushing it into a vertical frame. This is small, it's like, I think 8 by 10. So these kind of quick ideas. Again, coming out of the frame, this is cement that's poured in actually through the frame and coming out at the front. And then this piece, which this is kind of an important piece for me. I like was just using this camera that was a hand-me-down and a 35mm camera, and then my ex-boyfriend, XX, who knows how many X's ago, gave me a medium format camera for Christmas. And this was one of the first photos I took with that. And this is really this amazing area. So my parents moved to Northwest Colorado near Steamboat Springs, a really beautiful area. And this was like this snowshoe trail I would go on. So I was carrying around this photograph for a while. And then finally I had this, like, I'm like, what do I do with it? It's so beautiful. I don't know what to do. And then I just had this idea of like punching it in the face and thinking of that piece of wood as like holding it together, but also sort of damaging it, but also covering it, but also having this relationship between the wood and the birch and the wooden image and the trees. Actually, I think I showed this piece, the Fine Arts Workshop Center. That's a weird side note, but and so anyways, thinking of a photograph and how it's held into the wall. This is a rock I cast. It's actually a fake rock. This idea of the rock actually covering the photograph, and then cutting a hole in the wall and really jamming it in there. So this sort of, I don't know, almost like a violent action. And 2x4. So again, this 2x4 is pushing the photograph. There's a hole in the wall and it's holding it up. And that line of the tree, of course, is creating this line of the 2x4. And then that idea kind of on a larger scale with a 12-foot 2x4. This is for the show in Vienna at the Essel Museum. And I love this piece that their only thing holding that photograph into the wall is the pressure of this wood against the drywall. And then the top corner is like tucked into the wall itself. And this is like a newer piece, but for a show in Philly, like using glass to hold the photo, and there's an aluminum pipe behind there, so kind of holding it together. And this is called Slotted Sky. I'm sorry, Slotted Sunrise. And I've done this piece a few versions, but it's again kind of going back to my relationship with the wall or the drywall. There's two slots cut out of the wall, and the photo is sort of pushed into, both of the sides of the photo are pushed into the wall. So it's again being held up by the tension of the wall itself. And this piece for a show, again, how's the photograph held up? And in this case, the sort of giant piece of wood. It was this circular gallery that I was like, how is any artist going to figure out what they're going to hang in a circular gallery? And I had like a couple $100 budget. But so it's sort of a gesture to, I would say, like back to the architect, but it also a piece like this feels like a performance in terms of I have this chance to kind of pin. Also definitely a nod to Charles Ray piece and the Richard Serra piece that he's referring to also in this plank. And actually I've repurposed this wood, came back and is now holding up my lights in my studio. So that's cool. So the life continues for this. And again, how's the photograph held up? In this case, it's a concrete column, and I poured around the singular print that I actually print in the darkroom. People don't really ask me anymore, but in the beginning, they always asked me whether or not the photographs were my own, which they all are. And there's kind of a moment where I was like, does it have to be my own photograph? Maybe I can, go on the internet and download something. And I was like, no, I have to go there. And then I was like, hey, Mom, Dad, let's go to the Grand Tetons next summer. So the part of the journey is like me going to these places, taking the walks, gathering the images. There's sort of a time layered in there. The piece might not get made for a few years, but I like that living archive that these photographs become for me. Something really interesting about working with photography and how it can change, over time, depending on your mood or what you're looking at. And this is 2018. So again, how's the photograph held up? In this case, it's a giant steel I-beam that with a hole in the wall, and the tension is holding that up. So another approach is thinking about the back of a photograph. This is kind of an early piece. I think of it like a drawing, but these little V cuts, there's a piece of paper mounted to the back of the photo, painted red. And then the little back is kind of flipped forward. So you see the wall, you see the image, you see the front, and then it creates this also, abstract pattern onto it, almost like flags. So similar approach, but with two photographs mounted back to back. And I just love like seeing the wall behind in a work, not just the front. This was from a series I did where I was using bronze pieces. This is kind of a larger scale for me, in like 45 by, 40 by 55 or something. And I just did this series using all photographs I shot in Joshua Tree, where these bronze pieces would actually cut through the image and the frame. And again, what's behind a photo? So in this case, there's a wall. This piece was mounted. This is for a show I had at Art in General. And it was great because I had the whole space to work with, and I had a month to install, and I was really able to do some interventions in the architecture. So the wall is covering a window. I cut holes in the wall and then the same holes through this piece of aluminum. So at certain times of the day, the light will come through the piece and the wall into the ground. And it's this sort of surprise moment where you weren't really expecting. So again, kind of going through the photo and the architecture of the space. For this show, you could actually see through to the rest of the show through that piece that was on a steel pipe. And for this project in Portland, that again had these two huge hidden windows in the gallery. And I created this piece on site using photographs I had shot at the coast off Oregon, and holes cut into the wall. So on a rare sunny day in Portland, the sun would actually come through the windows into the gallery. And another move to the photos, thinking about folding the image, the surface. This is an early piece, but like just folding this photograph into a paper airplane, unfolding it, and how much that changed the meaning of the work, or what it did, or how it behaved, or how it could live. And I'm always still kind of surprised at how these simple moves, I call them, to the image can really change it for me and make it real. This is, I call this one Hug. And this is like an early work with cement. Thinking of the photo as like a body kind of folding into itself. This is a double-sided print. Sorry, I'm going to try to go a little faster. So even this, I return often to this sort of almost accordion fold as a way of, again, really trying to materialize that image and make it kind of come alive. And this piece, like even this is, again, like I'm really, testing things out, trying things out, what would happen. When I sunk this horizon line of this piece, it changed it so much. It was this photo I shot at the salt flats, and I kind of scaled it up, but for the piece, I was literally pouring concrete onto the back of the photograph. So it weighs a couple 100 pounds. A little bit later, similar to the Hug, and now I'm able to do UV printing directly onto steel and materials. So this was printed on zinc, which is very malleable, and kind of slotted it first. And again, folding with some concrete added onto, because I've had the opportunity, and those of you there in Provincetown, like, know how beautiful it is, but like I did a residency at the Headland Center. I did the one at Skowhegan. I have done residency at McDowell, and just like being able to go to these places also and shoot and spend time is like really inspiring to me. So like I spent 2 months out there in the Headlands and be able to just walk to the beach every day. That was so cool. Again, the image moving. This is again on metal, but slotted into the wall, called Hanging Sky. And this is another photograph I shot at the Headlands, and really wanting this image to sort of merge the wall and the floor and kind of sink into it, and use this pipe as a kind of foil, but also a, I don't know, stop to it, but also this relationship between the material of the steel and the reflection of the water. So it all sort of came together. And face down, this is one of my early metal steel pieces, but I just like this idea of the photo that you can see the footprint on here, the photo that like is face down and you can't even really see it. My dad was very offended by this piece. He was like, what the hell? He's like, is this for the earthworms or something? He was not a fan. He liked the other pieces, but this one he was not happy. Thinking about the strength of a photograph. So can it hold concrete together? This is like this probably like life size. That's how I'm seeing it on my screen. It's a small piece, but can the photo hold the concrete together? Can it hold up a steel pipe? And in a lot of these early pieces, they're sea prints I'm printing in the darkroom. Then later on, I'm printing on steel. So can this photograph hold up two steel pipes? This is a piece I made for a show in Paris a few years ago. And then concrete. So I started working with concrete around 2009, and I was really, I don't know, I'd seen a piece where an artist used concrete in this sort of very delicate way. And I was wondering like, oh, can concrete be kind of elegant or organic, or be, do something different than I thought? And I was interested in the relationship between the material and the photograph. In early pieces, I was kind of pouring it into a mold. And then I started pouring it onto the photographs themselves and creating box mold with the frame. So there's a photograph, a sea print, and then concrete's poured on it. And this piece, I spray painted it. And this was a small little detail, this yellow, where the cement like broke off. And then I realized that the emulsion had transferred onto the concrete. So I mean, this was actually my first happy accident piece where it's a photograph, the concrete, and then I put some more photos face down and it transferred it. So it's almost this printmaking technique where the image is transferred back onto the concrete. So I spent a better part of 6 months because I didn't write down the names of the concrete I had used that day. And I was like, oh, I tried doing it again and it didn't work. So I really had to, I spent an entire residency at Yaddo for a month, like testing. So as I progressed, I sort of figured some things out in terms of the brand and the type and how long it could cure. And I've done several pieces where I'm pouring the concrete into the frame with the photographs and other photos face down to create that. Now this is 100% concrete that I used to photograph, pour the concrete on top. So now the image is becoming the mold for the form and the image. There's another version of full concrete. And these are these are my largest wall pieces using that process. And you can see these white elements. So when I print in the dark room, it was interesting because like none of my process was even using a computer. Like I'm shooting a film, I come back, I'm printing in the dark room, I'm pouring concrete. So it's all, I see the work as this translation through my body of these processes. The rocks are used in the dark room to hold the paper down. And then there's all these variances and things I can't control. I mean, there's so much about this I can't control. I'm basically pouring them face down. This probably weighs 400 pounds. So these are the two largest ones. I finally got to go back to Hawaii. I got a Sherman Foundation travel grant in 2015. So that was really amazing. I spent a whole month shooting and my gosh, I use those images still all the time. It was so great. This is an install view. And then I started pouring and being interested in like trying a different kind of frame. What if it was a steel frame, a frame that started becoming an element with the work? Custom frames with steel elements on the face. This is a photos I took at Bryce Canyon. Shaping, using cutting shapes out of. It's always so hard for some reason to not do a rectangle, like or get to escape the rectangle, or at least for me. So kind of gradually chipping away at that rectangle. And then I started UV printing on top of the concrete and the photos, which is still inside there. And so I could actually print on the frame too. And another piece that's a combination of concrete and even photogram elements here with the photograph and just layering. And these are actually, then recently, I kind of like went back into this. Yeah, I mean, it was hard, especially like part of the COVID breakdown where like I locked down where I couldn't like use fabricators or access the dark room or these things like created some difficulty, but going back in this process of like adding color to the concrete itself to make the layers. So these are actually from last year. It's a photo I took in Death Valley. And this is going back. I took a negative from my trip to Hawaii and brought it back. So that was cool. So yeah, I love that I can kind of go back to these places and revisit. Sorry, okay, so focus. Lastly, like scale, so thinking about scale in my work, I think that's also something that photography for me offers a way of, there's the small intimate. So this is one example of an artist book I made 3 so far. I really want to make another one. That's, I think, maybe one of my New Year's resolutions, but the artist books all have cuts, folds, rips. You're going to be able to see multiple pages at once. They're very touchable. And I love that intimacy of like the book in your hand. So I was able to I folded the pages before they were bound and worked with the bookmaker. So from there, going to the large scale, this is my largest concrete piece that I made for the show at Art in General on site, which was actually, I probably should have thought about it more because I didn't really think about the future of this piece. This is the one thing that is I think an art handler told me this is gonna be, what is it? The albatross around your neck. This is about 600 pounds. Anyways, it's okay. Yeah, so quite a large piece that I made there in the gallery. And this is, it's funny when I first show this piece, it's like, where do I put this in my presentation? Because it is different, but you saw those drywall pieces from the beginning. This piece itself is actually from 2012 or 11. But I did my first version of it at Skowhegan. So my drywall skills, basically, it was for a show at the Morton Arboretum, and built this drywall wall in this tree. And it was up for maybe 4 or 5 months. So it really is this piece that like is just a mirroring of the wall of the tree. The tree is the star. It faces west, so as the sun rises and sets, the shadows are there. This is the back of the piece. You can see how it's made. There's not a single screw into that tree. It's safe, and it has enough room to kind of move. So, and actually the tree protects the wall. So this is kind of later on. This is towards the end of the summer. And right after I made that piece, I made my first large scale photo installation piece where I was using the architecture of the space as an element, as a sculptural element in the work. This was at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, where I'd just done a residency. So these giant wooden columns were in that space, and I wanted to make this piece. It's actually a photo. I actually just revisited the site because I took this photograph at Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and I was like, oh, there it is again. But I scaled the piece, so this amazing, I believe it's a ponderosa pine, is the same width as the real life column. So the back is just kind of blankness. And from there, this was for that show at Art in General. I really wanted to do something that moved and that went floor to ceiling. So I made this double-sided piece that was built around the columns at Art in General called Moonwave. And I built this wall on site, and then the piece was destroyed at the end of the show. So a lot of times the pieces are also ephemeral. And another piece, this piece, it still exists, which is great, and I can show it in different places, but it goes through the gallery wall. It's double-sided into the office of, this was my show at Higher Pictures, my second show at Higher Pictures. This is the office view, just kind of nudges in there. And it can go even further. And then I was invited a few years ago to do my first, my first commissioned outdoor sculpture. And I just started working with this UV printing technology. So now I can UV print onto corten steel. So the work, actually this piece almost goes back to the artist books for me, and thinking how the images relate. So this piece has two images. And also I was thinking about the seasons changing there at the de Cordova, and how maybe in the summer, this green would kind of fade into the background, and then the winter it would really pop. So, and the other thing is the back of the steel patinas beautifully over time. So it's actually still there. I think it is coming down this summer, and maybe I guess I'll install it somewhere in my yard. I don't know. But yeah, I welded this out, plasma cut it, but I work with a metal shop in Brooklyn. And then for my show at my last solo show in Grimmett, New York, I made some that we showed inside. I would love these to eventually go outside, but again, some large scale they're about 10 feet tall. This one's 12 feet tall, using UV prints directly onto steel. And this one then went outside, which is so great. Okay, I'm gonna try to go a little faster, I'm sorry. So then this past summer, I did have a project that COVID shuttered, but luckily last summer I was able to show one of those two pieces. So this is great to have. This piece was shown at Riverside Park in New York City, and right on the water. And finally this piece at RIT, which they commissioned, and I'm actually going to go visit it in a couple of weeks. I'm really interested to see how this will change over time as it rusts and changes from black to the red. And just some brief, this was a recent piece for an elementary school. So a long-term, permanent piece, which is so great to be able to do reoccurring ideas. I'm thinking about folding, kind of this playful turn of the moons. And this will be in this elementary school forever. So that was a really cool project. Again, you have the holes cut out and the backs and the fronts. And lastly, really quick, these final series of very new pieces I just made for the show in Paris. One of the activities of my COVID was I learned welding. I took welding classes because I really, want to know. So this series kind of came out of that and being able to, I don't know, I wanted to use the printing on steel and the folding and the bending and the welding, but going back to the wall and using these sort of negative spaces behind them. I love the burnout. I love the burn that happens when I'm welding on the printed steel, and the sort of accidents and that process. So it's a little bit new for me, but I'm excited about it. And this, oops, sorry. Yes, so those are all pieces from my show in Paris that just happened. And that is my last image.
What size is that image?
This piece is about 3 feet tall, maybe 30, what are centimeters? I was having such a hard time translating everything to centimeters over there, but roughly I would say it's 24 by 36 or so.
Very nice.
So, okay. Does anyone have any questions? Hopefully.
If anyone wants, you can type your question into the chat and we'll read it out, or you're welcome to unmute and ask away. I was just so intrigued by the variety of scale. Every time a slide or an image came up, I was like, is this one big or is this one small? And then I was looking for a little, reference point. And I loved when you mentioned, this one's 6 feet, this one is, 8 by 10. I love that variety in your work.
Yeah, it is kind of funny how then when it's all on the screen, it all kind of gets back into a form. You can't really judge the scale, but I definitely like, moving across scale when I can.
I have a question, Litha, if that's okay. I love, this was so fascinating. It was such a great talk. I really, really enjoyed it. I have a piece of yours. It's a small piece on concrete, and it was so awesome to hear you explain your process, and so thank you so much for your time. One of the things I didn't know from having followed your work for a while was that it's really important for you to take all the photographs yourself. And I wonder, which I think is wonderful, and I wonder, how much of that does the photograph impact the material and the decisions you make with it? And are there any places that you want to photograph that you haven't been able to get to yet that are it feels like a lot of the work you've done, this inspiration is sometimes the material, and I wonder how often it's vice versa, and if there's places that you've been wanting to photograph and integrate into your sculpture that you haven't had the chance to yet, or
yeah,
not.
Great question. Yeah, it's interesting, the back and forth. Sometimes I feel like I get in these moods with a color palette and I'm like, I want to go to Red Rocks or something, I'm drawn to this color almost. And I think often when I'm making, I do think a lot about color. And it's interesting because sometimes the first time I see one of my images, whether that be on a contact sheet or on the computer, I'm like, oh, I get an idea, it'll stand out. Other times, also now that I've built up these different processes, before every piece would be a kind of this image is for this, movement or this gesture. But now with the concrete, sometimes there's these greatest hits photos that just work really well, and they almost sometimes become pattern. And so I can use them differently. and that was also something like when I was at Skowhegan, I changed the way I was shooting because I realized it didn't have to just be this like vista. It could be like a couple leaves in a pile, and like I was like, oh, that could, you know, I can use that. So it opened it up so that I can just, as long as I'm going to these places and I'm aware and present and just capturing, it almost frees me from like having an idea of what it should look like, the photograph. It kind of opens it up. So it's this sort of organic, like,
uh-oh. Did I freeze or did everyone else freeze?
Oh, sorry. Did I freeze?
There was a
Shoot.
little bit of
Yeah,
freezing.
right. This amazing moment where, but anyway.
Sorry.
No, it's
The mice here heard me, but no one else. But it was funny because this just recently, my husband and I like went west, and I went back to places I'd been before, and it was so weird because like I would be in these places and I would remember the photograph of it instead of like, I don't know, it was a weird back where I was like, remember, oh, and then you use this piece in this, you know, this photograph in this piece. So that was different. Like I'd never really gone back that far before. It was always like, what's new, what's new, what's new? So that may not answer your question, but
it totally does. That was
okay. Thank you. Oh, Clarence had a question. Do you ever make drawings, or do you think of your entire process? Ugh, such a good question. Oh man. I don't know. Like, I think the models sometimes are drawings or little sketches I do. And I finally have like a little printer. So I'm always looking for something kind of immediate. And I used to be able to print a lot more regularly when I lived in the city. And now, I don't know. It is sometimes the process gets long and complicated, and it kind of is frustrating to me. So that's why I like to always have little tests happening. What about this? What about this? I'll dip this and whatever, have it sitting around. So, but yeah, more like collage drawings, I would say. Thank you. On the topic of DIY, can you now weld as necessary, or do you call on Brooklyn welders for assistance? Consider going grander for outdoors. So when they're very large, so I kind of, in this process, I went sort of big in the beginning because it's going to Cordova. We have some money. So I kind of went big, but it's 1,000-pound sculpture. So it has to be made in the metal shop. So pretty much, you know, and that's been the scale of most of them. But now that I'm learning, I mean, there's this limit, even in the concrete piece, as to what I can physically do. So sometimes it is, you know, that's part of why the UV printing is alluring, because you can go bigger. But it is this sort of like, yeah, like limitation. So now, I mean, I'm trying to get, like, I would love to have a welding studio here, but I don't yet. So I still have to go to a maker. I go to a maker space in Hartford, which is actually wonderful to just use their facility. But yes, I'm getting there. Maybe someday I'll have a really cool welding shop. I don't know. But I think it's really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious how your studio practice was, whether you had like team, you know, like working on like the steel pieces especially, or if you're kind of like doing it on your own. Obviously, you said you work with fabricators.
Yeah, it sort
of
depends. I do a lot of stuff. A lot of it's like, can this fit into my Subaru? Can I, you know, I know exactly what will fit in my Subaru. So if they're like medium-sized things or wall things, I have, you know, when I was in Brooklyn, I had, you know, I generally have like an assistant maybe one day a week, and that's helpful because there's often just things, again, I can't do myself. So I do like having an assistant and work. It's a little harder to find here in upstate New York, but yes, like having someone help me do that. And then occasionally working with like an actual fabricator where they're doing it in their shop. Like for that school project, I did that. And now that I'm doing UV printing, of course, I have to outsource that. So it is a lot of now like working with different parts and places to sometimes get the bigger pieces done.
I mean, I just have like a comment. I remember like when I first met you, like back in the day, I think you were working at Artist Space at the time. And I think I remember you going on your residency at
Oh
your
my
mom's
gosh.
place. And that might have been, you know, like since then, like we sort of like was out of touch. And but I do remember that's the small piece of the with the airplane fold.
Oh yeah.
I think I saw it at like a benefit auction or something, you know, and I still think about that piece because I just love how like it's a photograph, it's a drawing, and there's like the three-dimensionality that, you know, just like all these elements that play with this one piece of paper. So
Yeah.
that was, yeah, it's just something I think about a lot. And just like seeing how that idea developed into like bigger pieces, you know, throughout the years. And I think the last show I saw was at Grimm Gallery like a few years ago with the
Yeah.
accordion pieces. And yeah, the one with the steel, the curved piece on the wall with the steel
Yeah.
rod.
Yeah, sometimes like those big folding pieces, it's so stressful. It's like now that I'm working bigger and like I make this print and it's expensive, then I go to the shop and I'm gonna literally put it in the metal break, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? Like, so I feel like a lot of times I'm towing this line of like, will it even work? But I think that is kind of, I guess it's important to me to really push it as far as I can.
Yeah. Well, you make photography exciting.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, this, thank you. Break it open. I like that.
Well, I'm just going to jump in here and share our gratitude and thanks on behalf of the Fine Arts Work Center with artist Letha Wilson for joining us tonight, and I think inspiring all of us to really think about how an artistic career can make these incredible evolutions and transitions and really leaps and bounds throughout your history and your career. I was so inspired to hear also about how artist residency programs like the Fine Arts Work Center are so pivotal and integral in pushing your practice forward. And I just want to like share a special shout out of gratitude to your mom for the incredible letter of acceptance that was so inspiring to me and to many of us on this call, I'm sure, including our fellows. The Fine Arts Work Center is renowned for our 7-month fellowship program that welcomes artists and writers to beautiful Provincetown, as well as programs like this that offer free cultural experiences to connect working artists with cultural audiences and really add to the vibrancy of Provincetown. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you especially to Letha for sharing your time and talent and expertise.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. Bye. I appreciate it.
Thank you all. See you virtually very soon.